I always felt like an outsider in my own family, like a broken piece in a machine that just wouldn't fit, no matter how hard they tweaked it. While my numerous relatives enjoyed noisy parties, took endless selfies with painted faces, and posted 10 stories a day on social networks, I was much closer to the barely audible, almost intimate hum of my laptop and the indescribable feeling of satisfaction that I experienced when, after long hours of coding, a new line of clean, elegant code was launched, working, understandable, slender, unlike all the chaos that reigned in our family. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My name is Brittany, I am 28, and I am a programmer, a software developer, as they say, and although I have achieved success, and quite a lot, I run my own projects, collaborate with large companies, earn more than, as it seems to me, my parents earned together in their best years. Most people do not even realize this. I don't flaunt my victories, I don't trumpet every completed project. And I don't post photos from expensive coffee shops, I just don't see the point. I'm comfortable in the shadows, in silence, as if success loses its value if it needs to be proven to someone. My older brother Jake is the ideal, the darling, the pride of the whole family. He's loud, charming, energetic, a man of celebration, around whom everyone flocks at family gatherings like moths to a light. He followed in our father's footsteps and now runs a chain of small auto repair shops that, as my mother often said, have kept us afloat for 3 generations. He's always the center of attention, and everyone, from my grandmother to my second cousins, gasps in admiration when he walks into the room. And me? It's as if I dissolve, disappear, my life is between the lines, they barely notice my presence. It's not that they ignore me on purpose, no, they just have no interest in someone who can't raise a toast, make everyone laugh with a joke, or give a loud hug when they meet. I remember well how, as a child, at family celebrations, I would sit in the corner and watch Jake, shining like a New Year's garland, act out skits, retell stories from work, and everyone around would literally burst into laughter. They would pat him on the shoulder and say, "What a guy. We are proud of you, Jake." And they would turn to me as if out of politeness, "So how are your studies, Brittany?" They would ask with a forced smile, already turning away to Aunt Sharon, and it was always like that. The older we got, the more noticeable the gap became. Jake posted photos of get-togethers, corporate events, weddings on social media, while I wrote code and mastered yet another programming language, realizing that with each passing day I was only becoming further and further away from them. I dressed simply, jeans, t-shirts, no frills, makeup or accessories. For me, clothes are a function, not a performance. I didn't understand the point of posting every cup of coffee or selfie in the car on the internet, like my cousins did. She's kind of antisocial, I once heard Aunt Linda say in a half-whisper, but deliberately loudly, leaning over my mother at the holiday table. That's not normal for a girl her age. But everything really changed 2 years ago. It was my grandmother's birthday, her 80th. I knew I couldn't not come. She called herself and asked, "Please come, dear, I'll be very pleased." And I came for her sake. The community center was crowded, noise, hubbub, bustle, children running, adults interrupting each other, discussing business, reminiscing about how it was in the 80s. I was standing near the dessert table, trying not to get in the way, when I heard a familiar voice. Aunt Linda was whispering to Mom again, but this time she didn't try to hide that she was talking about me. "There's something wrong with that girl," she said, nodding in my direction. "She just sits there and watches. It's weird. I think she has some kind of psychological problems." I held my breath. My head was ringing, not from Linda's words, but from the expectation that Mom would now stand up for me. That she would say, "Don't talk about my daughter like that, she's just different, but she's smart, talented, and you have no right to judge her like that." I waited for it, hoping with all my might, gritting my teeth. Instead, Mom sighed heavily and let it out quietly, as if she had given up. "I know, honestly, sometimes I feel bad for her. She acts weird around people. I don't know what to do with her anymore." It was a blow, direct, cold, to the gut. My mom, not just disappointment, shame. She was ashamed of me. She didn't defend me, didn't explain, she just agreed, and I stood there for another hour, with a frozen smile on my face that was enough for everyone who happened to catch my eye. I sang "Happy Birthday" with everyone else, raised a glass of lemonade and pretended that everything was okay, but inside, inside, I already knew everything, the decision was made. If they think I'm weird, if I embarrass them, if being myself means being a burden to them, then fine, I won't force myself on them anymore. From then on, I stopped showing up at family celebrations. Invitations came, for Christmas, for Easter, for my cousin Sarah's wedding. I politely declined, sent gifts, wrote warm cards, but did not show up, the only person in my large and, as it turned out, rather deaf to other people's peculiarities family who really saw me, understood me not as I would have liked, but as I really was Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister, a woman with sad eyes, a quiet voice and an amazing ability to listen as if you were the most interesting person on earth. There was not a shadow of that fussy haste with which my relatives usually communicated with each other, no condemning looks, no routine phrases. She was always different, as if from a slightly different time, thoughtful, slow, real. When everyone else seemed too loud, too superficial, too alien to me, Aunt Margaret remained a warm island where I could be myself. Without fear and tension, she would often visit me in that same rented apartment with the narrow windows and creaky floors, bringing me warm homemade cookies and a tin covered in lavender fields, and sit at my dining room table, leaning on her elbow, a mug of coffee in her hand, listening attentively and patiently as I told her about my work, how I had implemented a new architecture, how I had finally set up the authorization module, how I had spent hours debugging a bug that turned out to be just a missing comma. "You're not weird, honey," she would say, leaning gently toward me as I hesitantly described how difficult it was for me to communicate with most people. "You're just wired differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. Silence is a choice, too. Not everyone has to shine in a crowd." During her visits, she brought me news of the family world, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to put together but kept anyway. She told me that Jake had been promoted to manager at one of the auto shops, that my mother had redecorated the living room and chosen blue wallpaper, even though she had always said that blue was the color of loneliness, that my father had finally bought himself a new truck and was now taking little trips around the neighborhood every day. She didn't try to pull me back into their circle, she simply shared what she thought was necessary so that I would know that the world was still turning, even if I chose to stay away, and that was enough for me. Meanwhile, my life, my real life, not the showy one, not the picture on social media, was developing surprisingly calmly and happily. My work brought me pleasure and income, and I had managed to gather around me a small but very warm circle of people who accepted me as I was, without the need to pretend. Among them was Tom, a graphic designer with a tentative smile and a kind, calm voice who preferred to draw on paper rather than a tablet and made the best garlicky fried eggplant I'd ever tasted. We spent evenings together, needing no noise, cooking dinner, arguing about TV series finales, having movie nights under the covers. It was everything I'd secretly dreamed of since I was a child: peace, closeness, understanding. My 28th birthday was an unexpected marker, the start of a new chapter. In the past, these had always been the days when I felt especially alone, perched on the edge of the couch, surrounded by people who seemed just waiting for an excuse to move on to someone else. This was different. Instead of a noisy family dinner, it was a quiet dinner at my favorite little restaurant with Tom and 5 friends who weren't pretending to be having fun, but actually laughing until they cried, until they hiccuped. We shared dessert, tasting each other's from a spoon, discussing old movies, laughing at silly stories, and no one even thought about taking out their phone to take a story, because at that moment, everything was real. A text came from my parents, short and empty: "Happy birthday, have a nice day." No call, no attempt to arrange a meeting, no sign that they missed me. Jake didn't text at all, no happy birthday, no good luck, not even an emoji, and only Aunt Margaret, as always, did not disappoint. She came to me with a chocolate cake, decorated with cherries by hand, with a smile that was so warm that for a moment I thought that if everyone were like her, I would never feel like an outsider. "I'm so proud of you," she said as we sat alone in my small kitchen, over the steam from our coffee mugs. "Look how far you've come, without anyone's help. You built your life yourself." And then, under that look, in which there was not an ounce of doubt, I decided to tell her what I had been keeping inside for the past weeks. "I'm buying a house," I said quietly, almost dropping my spoon in my excitement. Her eyes widened, just like when I first read a book out loud without stumbling as a child. "Are you serious? This is amazing." I pulled out my phone, opened an album of photos, and showed her the front of the house, the white door with the round window, the spacious kitchen with its white cabinets, the backyard with its tall trees, where the sunlight scattered through the leaves like gold. 5 bedrooms, I added, almost apologetically, and she looked at me with awe. 5 bedrooms. Brittany, this is incredible, you must be doing great at work. I nodded, and although I was still shaking inside with fear that I was sharing too much of myself, I felt a feeling blossom inside me, not even pride, but a deep, adult calm. Yes, I'm doing well, but I added, almost in a whisper, please don't tell anyone yet, I'm not ready, I want this to be mine, all mine. Of course, she said, covering my hand with hers, but, honey, you should be proud of this, it's a big accomplishment. 2 weeks later, I held the keys in my hands, the keys to the house, my home, my space, my place in the world. The move felt like more than just a change of address, it felt like I'd entered another version of myself, stronger, freer. Each room was waiting for me, not as a lodger, but as a hostess, and I greedily settled into them, slowly, lovingly. No more thin walls through which I could hear the neighbors arguing over the dishes, no more worries that my late night tinkering with the code would wake someone up. This was mine alone, everything, and it was perfect. I spent weeks making the house my own. The master bedroom became my sanctuary, soft gray walls, thick curtains, a wooden bed covered with a wool blanket, everything had its place. One of the spare bedrooms in my house, so quiet and warm and truly mine, quickly became my home office, real, organized, comfortable. The kind I'd dreamed of all those years working at a small table in the corner of my apartment, surrounded by wires and extraneous sounds. There were 2 monitors on an adjustable desk, neatly tucked away cables, and the most comfortable ergonomic chair I could find, gray, with soft lumbar support, adjustable height, and armrests that were nice to rest on when I was lost in thought and looking out the window. I had lovingly decorated the other room as a guest room, neutral, soft colors, a cozy blanket, a set of fresh towels, and a night light with a warm glow for Aunt Margaret, if she decided to stay, or for my friend Sarah, who sometimes visited from the neighboring area and didn't like to come home late. There was one more bedroom, empty for now, but I had my eye on a dresser and chair, imagining how I would eventually turn it into something special, perhaps a drawing studio, or a mini library, with a chair by the window and a tall bookcase. But the real gem of the house was the kitchen. Every time I walked in, I felt my shoulders straighten inside, not from pride, but from pure pleasure. The granite countertops were cool to the touch, the stainless steel appliances gleamed to catch the morning light, and there was enough space to do more than just heat up food, to actually cook. With recipes and samples and aromas dancing between the stove and the sink, I'd bought a large wooden dining table, seat 8, solid and sturdy, with the living grain of the wood, though to be honest I'd never had more than 4 guests, but there was something special about knowing you could invite more if you wanted, that you had a space that was ready to receive. Once everything was sorted out, books shelved, blankets laid out, every vase in its place, I decided it was time for a little housewarming. No fanfare, no loud toasts or wild dancing, just a Saturday afternoon get-together with the people who really mattered. I sent out simple text invitations, nothing fancy, just drop by on Saturday for food and tea and I'd love to see you. I invited about 10 people. Everyone who had been around for the last few years, a small but real group. Sarah, a friend from college who now teaches high school English and always had a book in her bag. Mark and Lisa, a tech couple I'd once done a hackathon with and had become fast friends with. James, a funny, kind guy I'd gone to school with, now an accountant, who always brought cupcakes. And, of course, Tom, with a bouquet of fresh wildflowers and a kind word about every room in the house. The company was surprisingly diverse, but exactly what I needed. And when Aunt Margaret showed up at the door with a huge casserole smelling of cheese and herbs and a smile so wide and bright that I wanted to hug her right there in the doorway, I knew, this is right, everything is right, I'm so proud of you, she said, hugging me. This house, it's so beautiful, so yours. We spent the day just as I dreamed, food, conversation, leisurely tours of the house, where I lovingly showed off everything from the built-in bookcase to the new frying pan I'd bought for myself as a gift. No one joked that I was weird or different, no one asked how I could afford it at all, no one doubted my right to succeed. People were just there and enjoying themselves with me, sincerely, without judgment, without ulterior motives. As the sun began to set and the evening light slid across the curtains in the living room, the guests began to slowly leave. We hugged at the door, promised to meet again, and it was so homely, so humanly warm. Aunt Margaret was the last one left. The two of us cleared the table, I loaded the dishwasher, and she dried the plates, as if she had always been a part of this house. It was perfect, she said, putting the last cup in the dryer. The perfect number of people, the perfect mood. It was all very much your style, peaceful, cozy, very nice. I just smiled. She was right, nothing showy, just the point. And then, as if in passing, with the same caution with which one mentions the rain at a picnic, she said, "By the way, your mother asked if I had heard from you lately." I froze, wiping the granite countertop. Everything inside me tensed up, as if someone had touched an old, not yet fully healed wound. "And what did you tell her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I said you were fine." "Do you think she was curious about what I was doing?" I asked guardedly, curious enough to call me herself? Aunt Margaret looked at me sympathetically, her hands, still damp from the water, falling to rest on the cloth towel. "You know how she is, dear, it's hard for her. Pride is, well, it's like armor for her." I knew, Mom would never admit outright that she was curious, that she missed me, or, God forbid, that she was wrong. It was easier to pry from my sister, easier to watch from the sidelines, than to say something first. It had always been like that. The next 2 months in my new home passed so calmly, as if I had entered another reality, without shouting, without reproaches, without that feeling that you always have to prove something. I got into my new rhythm, working from home, projects, rare meetings with clients. Everything is well coordinated and at my own pace. In the evenings, I cooked in my perfect kitchen, slowly, with pleasure, putting food on plates that I had never dared to cook before in a tiny apartment, and then, settling down in the living room with a blanket, I read. Sometimes half a book in an evening. Tom came over several times a week, and we either watched a movie or worked side by side, he on illustrations, I on code, in a cozy, real silence. One evening, when I was debugging a complex section of code in the semi-darkness of my office, with a mug of tea on a coaster and music in the background, as usual, a notification of an incoming call suddenly popped up on the laptop screen. The name on the display made me freeze. Jake. I blinked, thinking it might be a mistake or spam, but the name kept flashing. Jake, my brother. He hadn't called me in over a year, and it felt almost unreal, like someone was trying to remind me of a life I'd long ago shelved. I slowly reached for the phone, holding it to my ear with a wary hello, as if the word were a bone I had to bite through to see if it was rotten inside. "Hey, Brittany, how are you?" His voice was unusually cheerful, with that awkward edge you hear when someone is trying to be nice but can't hide the fact that they really don't mean it. "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but not overly warm. "What's wrong?" "You're not the type to just call to check on your sister." He laughed, briefly, too loudly, as if he were trying to convince himself of his ease rather than me. "Can't a brother just call?" There was a joke in his voice, but it didn't stick. "Actually," he continued, and I felt the tension in his voice grow, "I wanted to invite you somewhere. I bought an apartment, a really nice one, a 2-bedroom, downtown. I'm having a housewarming party this Saturday, and I want you to come." I blinked. "Ah, that's it." The irony washed over me like a wave. "Congratulations," I said, guardedly, allowing my voice to warm a little. "Thank you," he said. "So can you come?" "The whole family will be there, Mom, Dad, all the aunts and uncles. It's been too long." The whole family. All the people who had whispered about my weirdness for years, who had avoided eye contact when I showed up at parties, all the people who had found me odd and out of place. I took a deep breath. "I don't know, Jake. I've been really busy lately. Please, Brittany, it's important to me." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. A request, a plea even. It was strange. Jake had never invited me personally before. Usually I'd just gotten a general invite, as one of the many others, and everyone knew I wasn't coming. And then the call, a personal invitation, intonation. I surprised myself when I said yes. I didn't even know why. Maybe it was pure curiosity. What was he up to? Or maybe a tiny, almost forgotten part of me still yearned for recognition, for participation, even if I knew for sure that it would, as usual, turn out to be a disappointment. As soon as we hung up, I immediately called Aunt Margaret. "He invited me to a housewarming party," I said, still not fully processing what had happened. "I know," she answered, and there was a light, almost cheerful understanding in her voice. "I got an invitation too, the whole family will be there," I added, and this time it sounded not like a description of the event, but like a warning. "But why?" I tried to make sense of my brother's actions, who always cared only about his own reputation. "He never invited me anywhere, why now?" Aunt Margaret was silent for a moment, then suddenly laughed, a low, knowing laugh, as if she were hearing an old family joke. "What's so funny?" I asked, clutching the phone tighter. "Oh, honey," she said, barely containing her laughter, "I think your brother's just showing off. He thinks you're still living in your little apartment and he wants the whole family to see how much better he has it than your weird sister." And everything fell into place. Pieces of the puzzle that hadn't fit before. Jake didn't know about my house. No one knew, except Aunt Margaret. To everyone else, I was still this mysterious, withdrawn girl, half-employed at some shady computer job, renting a cramped apartment. I suddenly felt a smile spread across my face, not an angry, sarcastic smile, but almost a cheerful one. "What are you thinking about?" Aunt Margaret asked. My smile widened. "I think I'm really looking forward to this party." And it was true. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent a long time going through my closet, choosing what to wear, and eventually settled on a simple but elegant option: dark jeans and a nice soft sweater. Nothing fancy, but certainly not what my family would expect from a budget girl. As a gift to Jake, I bought an expensive coffee maker, high quality, stylish, something he clearly did not expect from me. It cost a lot more than he would have guessed, and there was a quiet gesture in it, not provocative, but with dignity. Jake's apartment complex was new, modern, in the center of the city, with mirrored facades, a gym, a reception desk and a doorman at the entrance. Not bad, but none of that impressed me, not after my home, my space, built from scratch and with love. I took the glass elevator up to the 4th floor, and as soon as the doors opened I heard voices, laughter, that familiar, slightly deliberate hum of family gatherings. Jake's door was wide open, as if he wanted anyone passing by to look in and see that there was a man living here who had everything right. As soon as I stepped into Jake's apartment, the atmosphere of the space, filled with voices, laughter, and the smell of food, seemed to send me back in time to those moments when I felt like a stranger among my own, when every gesture, every look, every word was a reminder of how much I didn't fit into the picture that my family considered normal. Everything came back with unexpected clarity: the tightness in my chest, the uncertainty in my shoulders, the inner protest wrapped in a polite smile. The apartment was crowded, noisy, cramped. It seemed like almost everyone I hadn't seen for over a year was there. Aunt Linda, as always, was regally positioned closer to the kitchen and, energetically waving her arms, was telling another dramatic story, accompanying each line with expressive head nods, as if she were not just sharing news, but delivering a speech to a jury. The cousins were huddled in the living room, their faces glued to their phones, as if their faces were display cases hiding boredom, clumsily disguised by important correspondence, while they talked idly to each other, not really listening to each other. And by the window stood Mom and Dad, each with a glass of something fizzy, and I noticed how their heads turned in unison to me when I walked in. "Brittany?" Mom's voice was strained with animation, as if she were trying to sound casual but couldn't hide her surprise. "You actually came." There was more than just joy in her tone, there was amazement, almost a little fear, as if she were expecting to see a ghost rather than her own daughter. Several heads turned in my direction, and I literally felt a wave of silent assessments roll through the room. They looked at me as if trying to remember who I was, and then, having remembered, they added, "Oh, that weird one." "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad," I said, stepping closer and giving them both a gentle, almost symbolic hug. Then I handed them the gift bag. "This is for Jake," I added, trying to sound confident. Dad took the bag, peered inside, and said, squinting, "A coffee maker. Well, that's nice." His tone was neutral, not a hint of excitement, as if he expected the gift to be something simple, not too meaningful, and he was right. Or maybe he was wrong, but didn't want to admit it. I could feel their eyes, the ones that looked you over from head to toe, that seemed to whisper without words. "In jeans again, no makeup, no jewelry." I heard someone whisper behind me, "You see, she looks exactly the same style, like she really still dresses in thrift stores." Another voice, perhaps Uncle Ed or one of the cousins, Added, they say she still lives in that tiny apartment. I just smiled and nodded, not stopping, not reacting. I felt no anger toward any of these people, only a tired understanding. They hadn't changed, and they probably never would. Across the room, Aunt Margaret caught my eye and gave me a knowing, almost encouraging expression. There was no surprise or condemnation in her eyes, just that quiet support that needs no words. At that moment, Jake appeared at my side, beaming like an actor at a premiere, his smile wide, theatrical, a little louder than necessary. "Brittany, you did it," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Come on, I'll show you around." He took my elbow and led me around the apartment, like a tour guide guiding guests through a new hotel. The apartment was indeed nice: modern furniture, light walls, large windows, a stylish kitchen, 2 bedrooms, just like he'd said. He'd gone on and on about the granite countertops, the walk-in closet, the built-in storage. "Impressive, huh?" he asked when we'd finished our tour. "In the living room, too. Bedrooms, great location, all the amenities. I'm doing quite well." "Very nice," I said, and I meant it. That's when I first noticed the woman standing next to him, blonde, well-groomed, with her hair perfectly done and wearing a dress that probably cost more than my entire outfit. She looked like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine, and carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who knows how to make a good impression. "And this is my fiancée, Jessica," Jake said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "We're getting married in the spring." That took me by surprise. I held out my hand. "Congratulations, I didn't know you were engaged." "It was just a month ago," Jake said proudly. "We're planning the perfect life together." The family crowded around like bees around honey, peering at Jessica's finger, admiring the ring, asking questions about the venue, the style of the dress, the invitations. I stood a little to the side, listening to it all happen, feeling like an observer rather than a participant, like I was watching a movie, a good budget, a decent script, but an outsider. When it was time for dinner, everyone sat around the long table Jake had set up in his living room. I found myself between Aunt Margaret, smiling softly, and one of the younger cousins I barely knew. Jake stood up, a satisfied expression on his face and a beer in his hand, and began to speak. "I want to thank everyone for coming out to celebrate this day with Jessica and me," he began, looking around the room. "This apartment represents everything I've worked for. I have a great business, a wonderful fiancé, and now the perfect place to start our lives together." Everyone clapped and clinked glasses, raising them high above their hot dinners and salads, some shouting "Jake and Jessica," some repeating the words of the toast, and some just clapping like clockwork, as if it were part of a script. I sat in my seat, between Aunt Margaret and a cousin whose name I could barely remember, and caught everyone's eyes on me, trying to resist that old habit of hunching my shoulders and retreating into myself. Then, as the noise died down a bit, Jake's gaze met mine, and there wasn't simple curiosity or friendly warmth in it, just something subtle but familiar, a desire to assert himself at my expense. "You know, Brittany," he said with that mock concern that masks condescension, "you really should take a good look around this place. Maybe it will inspire you to set some goals, something to strive for, you know?" There was a snicker in the room, the kind that sounds more like the reaction of an audience member on a cheap sitcom. Dad looked at me, tilting his head to the side and plastering on that half-smile I remembered from my childhood. "Smug, patiently patronizing." Jake continued, a little louder. "Well, I mean, you're not going to live in that rented apartment of yours forever, are you? Maybe someday you'll be able to afford something like that." In the silence that followed, the only sound was the soft click of cutlery on china. The people at the table froze, their gazes slid towards me. Some with anticipation, some with awkwardness, but almost all with the feeling that something awkward was about to happen, a moment when the weird sister would be forced to smile and laugh it off. My cheeks were burning, but not from embarrassment. No, it was the feeling of anticipation bubbling under my skin. The moment of truth was approaching. Aunt Margaret, who was sitting next to me, cleared her throat loudly, getting my attention, and with the same casual clarity with which she used to say, "The cookies are still warm," she said. "That's why she bought a 5-bedroom house," and her voice, suddenly clear, as if it had stepped across the table, "because she can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment." There was a deathly silence. Not a single person moved in the room, even the air seemed to freeze. Uncle Tom's fork paused halfway to his mouth, as if in slow motion. Everyone was looking at me. My mother was the first to break the silence. "What did you just say?" she asked, her expression like she couldn't believe it was even possible. I took a sip of water, letting the moment hang in the air a little longer, letting each breath become a little heavier. I bought a house 2 months ago, I said quietly, looking straight ahead, 5 bedrooms, in Oakwood Heights. The name hit me like a blow, quiet but noticeable. Oakwood Heights was a neighborhood spoken of with respect, a hint of envy, sometimes distrust, the most prestigious in the city, a place where only the made were thought to go. The whispers began to creep around the room, like a wind slowly gathering strength before a storm. I watched the faces change, first confusion, then surprise, then, almost panic. Jake went pale, as if all the blood had drained from his face. "You're kidding," he said, clearly hoping I would laugh and say, "Oh, of course not," but I wasn't going to. "She's not kidding," Aunt Margaret interjected, pulling out her phone. "I went to her housewarming party. It's a beautiful house." She passed the phone around, the photographs they'd taken that day, my living room, my kitchen, my backyard, now being passed around like evidence in a trial. I watched the faces change, from narrowed-eyed skepticism to shock and then, for some, even panic. Mom opened her mouth as if to say something, but only let out a breath. "How can you afford that?" And, realizing how her question sounded, she fell silent. "I'm a senior software developer," I said, keeping my voice low. "I work with Fortune 500 companies. On their core systems, I'm doing pretty well." What happened in the next few seconds was like a pressure release from a steam boiler. The room literally exploded. Someone started asking if they could see the house. Another started declaring that he always knew I could do it. A third enthusiastically assured me that he always supported me. I just sat there and finished my dinner, carefully pushing mashed potatoes onto my fork and watching the chaos slowly unfold. Jake looked like he was about to fall through the floor. Mom and Dad sat there, speechless, each in their own silent shock, perhaps trying to remember exactly when it all went wrong, when they stopped being aware of who they were. "You should have another housewarming party," someone shouted from the end of the table, "and invite all of us. We could help with the decor," another voice added. "I always said Brittany was the smart one in the family," another voice said, and at that moment I really had trouble holding back my laughter. These were the same people who had been whispering behind my back for years, calling me distant, antisocial, weird. About an hour into this merry-go-round of admiration and sudden insight, I felt sated, not with the food, but with everything that was happening. To the brim, I stood up from the table and said calmly, "I think I'll go." Several people jumped up. "Wait. Tell us more about the house. Maybe you can show us some pictures?" "Maybe next time," I replied with a soft smile, knowing with complete certainty that there would be no next time. As I drove home, toward the lights of my quiet, real home that smelled of cinnamon and freshness, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. My phone was blowing up with messages before I even turned off the engine of my car, and with each new vibration, each ping at the top of the screen, I had one desire to simply ignore it all, and that's exactly what I did. I didn't read a single notification, I didn't listen to a single voicemail, I didn't pretend to care who had something to say after all this. Instead, I walked into my cozy, spacious house, took off my shoes at the door, and, without turning on the light, walked straight into the living room, where the soft evening light was filtering through the curtains. I plopped down on the couch with such relief, as if I had shed not only my shoes but also all the pressure that had built up over the evening. "I'm never inviting any of them here," I said out loud to the empty room, the only sound of the rustling leaves outside the window. "Never." The next morning, when I went down to the kitchen, still in my pajamas and with my hair tousled, and turned on the coffee maker, my phone lit up so brightly, as if it was trying to shout over the aroma of freshly ground coffee. 17 missed calls, 43 texts. Mom called 6 times, leaving at least 3 voicemails. Dad sent 4. Jake seemed to have gone from politely apologizing to desperately trying to clear the air. Even the cousins I hadn't exchanged a line with since college were suddenly writing. I sat at the table, cupping my mug in my hands, idly scrolling through the messages without responding to any of them. Almost all of them followed the same pattern: first a faux surprised exclamation, then a saccharine congratulations, and finally a subtle hint, "It would be great to see your house sometime." My mom's voicemails were like choreographed performances. The first one, almost sweetly, said, "Brittany, honey, please call me back. We need to talk about last night. I didn't know you were doing so well." The third, more firmly, said, "You can't just drop this bomb and disappear without an explanation. Your dad and I are worried." Jake, on the other hand, tried to hook me through vulnerability. His messages began with, "I'm sorry for what I said, I didn't know," and moved to, "Please, let's talk," and finally, "We need to talk about this, it's important." I deleted most of the messages, feeling neither remorse nor pity. They all wanted access to something they felt was not mine. The only person I actually called back was Aunt Margaret. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked as soon as she heard my voice, and I immediately heard the smile in her intonation. "Are you pleased with yourself?" "Honestly, Margaret," I said, laughing uncontrollably, "it was worth it just for one thing." To see Jake's face, she laughed too. "They're all talking about you now. Linda's already called 3 of her friends to discuss your house, and some of your cousins suddenly started remembering how much they've always respected you. Funny how it all works, huh?" I sighed. "When you're ordinary, you're weird. When you're successful, you're suddenly interesting." The messages continued for a few more days. Someone wanted to meet just to chat, someone had always dreamed of establishing a connection with the family, and someone wrote without embarrassment, "Show me at least one photo of the kitchen." I ignored almost everything, but at some point, when my mother called for the 10th time, I finally picked up. Her voice wasted no time on ceremony. "Brittany, we need to talk. Why don't you come over for dinner on Sunday?" "Just family, no nonsense, I'm busy," I answered calmly. "I have plans with friends." There was a pause on the other end, that heavy one, like before a storm. "Brittany, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she began. "You and your father want to work things out. We've missed you." I almost laughed. "You missed me? When exactly?" "I've missed a year and a half of all family events, and no one has even texted or called, not once." "We're your family, we love you," she said sharply, with that characteristic note of hers that I'd known since childhood, a voice that sounded not of love, but of control. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have spent so many years convincing me that there was something wrong with me," I replied, and hung up when he didn't answer. 2 weeks passed. On Saturday afternoon, I was working in the garden, trimming the rose bushes and enjoying the silence, when I heard someone pull up to the house. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked out onto the driveway. Mom, Dad, Jake, and Jessica got out of the car, all dressed up for show, looking at the front of my house, not hiding their surprise and envy. I sighed heavily and walked up to them, stopping on the steps. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not trying to hide the coldness in my voice. "Your aunt gave us the address," Mom said, as if it were an excuse. "We just wanted to see your beautiful house." They weren't invited, but that didn't stop them. They walked past me without breaking stride, as if they knew they didn't need permission to enter a life they'd once refused to be a part of. Jake whistled softly as he stepped through the door, and I could almost feel his eyes glancing over every detail of the foyer, taking in an atmosphere so far removed from his idea of me that he clearly didn't know how to act. "This place is incredible," Jessica said admiringly, looking around with wide eyes that showed genuine amazement mixed with not so well hidden curiosity. "How much did it cost?" she asked with that easy nonchalance that some women use when they're sure their question is appropriate. "It's none of your business," I replied evenly, with polite coldness. And then I saw Jessica's shoulders jerk back, as if my answer had hit her a little harder than she expected. They wandered through my living room and kitchen, touching things, opening cabinets, stopping at shelves, commenting on tiles, paneling, furniture. They behaved not like guests coming to show respect or interest, but like buyers at a property showing. I felt the chills rise from their intrusion, as if they weren't just entering my home, but digging through my life, looking for evidence that they had been right before. "So," Jake began, with a fake smile that betrayed tension clumsily disguised as good nature, "I was thinking, you know how successful our family business has become, right? Well, there's a great opportunity. I'm planning on expanding, 2 new stores, and I'm looking for investors." He paused, looking at me slightly askance, as if to make sure I was still paying attention. "Family investors," he added, emphasizing the word family. "You could get involved from the very beginning of something really big." I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. "You want me to invest in your auto repair shop?" I asked, not even trying to hide the irony. "It's a safe investment," he said forcefully, "guaranteed profit, and it would be a great way for us to work together. You know, combine your technical knowledge with our business, take it to the next level." I laughed. I couldn't help it. the laughter just came out of nowhere, not an angry one, not loud, but such that the air in the room changed. "What's so funny?" Dad asked sternly, looking at me as if I'd broken an unwritten family rule. "I prefer to invest in reliable companies," I said, still smiling. "Big projects, technological ones, not brake pads and tire shops." Jake blushed to his ears. "My business is solid," he muttered. "I'm sure it is, I'm just not interested." There was an awkward silence in the room. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, something urgent, silent, an attempt to return to what had been before but could no longer be. "Brittany," Dad said with the same intonation with which he had once called me to him as a child, when I had broken a vase or brought home a note from school, "we want to repair the relationship. Family should help family." There it was, the real reason for their visit. "You want to repair the relationship because you found out I have money?" I asked calmly, my voice low, but there was a steely accent to the words. "That's not fair." Mom tried to object, but her voice lacked the determination she usually put into arguments. "Isn't that right? Where were you on my birthday? Where were you when I bought this house? Where have you been for all the important moments in my life?" Jake stepped forward, as if he wanted to close the distance that had grown between us over the years. "Look, I know we weren't close before, but," he hesitated, choosing his words, "now you need money, and suddenly I'm part of the family again." His words hung in the air like dust that someone had kicked up and now didn't know how to settle back down. The silence stretched. I straightened up. "I think it's time for you to go," I said calmly but firmly. "Brittany, you're being unreasonable," Dad said with emphasis. "At least we're trying. I don't need your efforts, I don't need your fake concern, I don't need anything at all." I walked to the door and threw it wide open. "Please go." They froze, amazed that I was actually throwing them out. Jake was the last to pass me, throwing out a parting shot. "Okay, but don't expect an invitation to my wedding." "I'm still not coming," I replied, and at that moment I felt wings spreading inside me. The next day, Aunt Margaret called. "Your mother called yesterday, in tears. She said that you've become greedy and ungrateful." Her voice sounded calm, as always, with a barely audible irony. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think I'm just defending myself, and frankly, it's about time," I answered, pouring myself some tea. Over the next few weeks, the family drama continued, but without my participation. Aunt Margaret kept me informed, like a bystander commenting from the sidelines, my mother complaining to anyone who would listen that I was overdoing it in life, Jake complaining resentfully about my selfishness, one family member taking one side and another taking the other, but I didn't care. I had my job, which was going better than ever. I had Tom, my boyfriend, who had moved in with me a month ago, and we drank coffee in the backyard every morning. I had my small but real circle of friends, those who loved me not for my expense, not for my successes, but for who I was, and I had Aunt Margaret, who still showed up every Sunday with homemade cookies and a smile and a warmth that didn't have to be earned.